Welcome back, night travelers, to Nakora Nights. There's something different about driving through Appalachia. The roads twist without warning, the mountains block your signal, and the darkness feels too close. Out here, the GPS lies. Road signs repeat, and sometimes the road takes you somewhere it shouldn't exist. Tonight, we're uncovering 10 true Appalachia road trip horror stories. Real encounters from drivers who took the scenic route and learned too late why locals avoid these roads after dark. A car that followed them for miles with no headlights. A gas station that vanished when they tried to return. And a voice on the radio that knew their name. These aren't campfire stories. These are confessions from people who still check their mirrors, even when they're home. Before we head deeper into the mountains, tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? Because in Appalachia, some roads only open at night. If you're brave enough to stay on this ride, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. I survived the Appalachian roads. Now, buckle your seatbelt, turn up your headlights, and whatever you do, don't take the next turn. This is 10 untold most disturbing true Appalachia road trip horror stories. Let's begin. I never meant to drive into those mountains alone, but guilt has a way of chasing you harder than anything on the road. My brother had been begging me for months to visit him in a small Appalachian town called Wood Hollow, a place tucked so deep between ridges that cell service felt like a rumor. I kept promising I would come, always blaming work, always pushing things off until one cold November evening when something in me finally snapped. I loaded my old SUV with a night bag, a blanket, a few snacks, and a pack of the craft drinks he loved. I worked as an animal shelter assistant in a busy rescue center far from the mountains, spending long days cleaning cages and taking care of abandoned dogs. I had no real social life. Most people my age already had partners, families, homes, and I was still living in a small rented room above a bakery where the walls shook whenever someone slammed a door downstairs. That night, I left later than I planned because a kitten with a broken jaw came in, and I could not leave until the little creature was stable. By the time I locked the rescue center and started the engine, the sky had already turned dark, and the cold air coming off the ridges carried a smell like rain and leaves and something older. I started the 3-hour drive toward Wood Hollow just after 7:32 p.m., telling myself I would reach my brother before midnight. The first stretch of the road was normal, branches shaking above me, radio humming softly, and the glow of passing towns giving me small pockets of comfort. But once the highway narrowed and the ridges rose up around me, the world changed. The Appalachian Mountains have a way of swallowing sound and light. The deeper you go, the more the darkness presses against your windshield like a living thing. I turned up the heater and tried to keep calm. A true crime podcast played in the car, some story about a missing hiker, and for a moment I wondered why people like scaring themselves with tragedies that happen to real people. The traffic thinned until it felt like I was the only driver left in the world, winding through a forest so dense that the trees seemed to lean in close, watching. Around 8:49 p.m., I stopped at a small mountain gas station, the kind that looked older than the falls of the leaves around it. A couple climbed out of a dusty car beside me, talking quietly. Inside, a barefoot teenage girl stocking shelves brushed past the woman from the couple and slipped a folded piece of paper into her hand. The girl whispered, "Please don't leave me here," before an older man with a gray beard grabbed her arm and yanked her into a back room. The woman stared at the note, confused, but the man told her they were closing soon. The couple hurried out, the woman pale and shaken, and I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Something about that girl's eyes stuck with me. She looked like someone standing at the edge of a cliff with no place to run. I paid for gas, grabbed a hot drink, and the attendant, an older woman with tired eyes, warned me that the fog was thick past ridge marker 11. I thanked her, stepped outside, and tried to shake off the unease curling under my ribs. After I pulled onto the winding road again, things quieted. No sound except my engine. No lights except my own beams cutting through fog that crept like fingers across the asphalt. 27 minutes after leaving the station, I noticed headlights behind me. At first, nothing seemed strange. People traveled these mountain roads at night all the time, especially truckers or hunters or families heading home late. But the lights came up fast, far too fast, then settled so close behind me that the glow filled my entire car. High beams. Blinding. I tilted my mirror down to escape the glare and squinted into the side mirror. It looked like a van at first, then maybe a pickup, older model, lifted high. I tapped my brakes gently, the universal signal to back off, but the vehicle did not slow. It crept closer, almost touching my bumper, and the heat of those lights felt like fingers pressing into the back of my neck. I told myself it was just some impatient mountain driver wanting me to move faster. I was already going 68 in a 55 zone, more than enough for a road this dark. The right lane was completely open. If he wanted to pass, he could have done it easily. But he didn't. He stayed behind me like a shadow stuck to my tail. I sped up to 72. The van matched me, 75. It matched again. My stomach twisted. I checked my phone. 1 bar. Barely enough to load anything. I tried calling my brother. The call didn't connect. A spinning icon, searching for something that was not there in the mountains. I moved into the right lane, slowing deliberately to give the driver a chance to pass. Instead, he followed me into the right lane. Same distance, same blinding light filling my mirrors. A cold spike of fear stabbed my chest. Whoever was driving was not trying to pass. They were following me. I tried calling emergency services. No signal. The fear that crawled into my bones then felt like standing in a field during a lightning storm with nowhere to hide. Ahead, the road stretched out empty. No houses, no stores, no turns, just the black tunnel of forest pressing around me. The van moved into the left lane suddenly, engine roaring loud. For a second, I thought the driver would pass. Relief fluttered weakly inside me. But the van did not pass. It pulled up beside me, keeping my exact speed, then slowly drifted toward my lane, inch by inch, a predator nudging prey. I jerked right, hitting the gravel shoulder. The rumble shook the entire car. My hands tightened around the wheel. The van pulled back, falling behind me again, the lights blinding me once more. As we passed under a rare stretch of road lit by a single overhead lamp, I glimpsed the driver. A broad-shouldered man, hat pulled low, posture stiff, hunched toward the wheel like he was studying me. I couldn't see his face. The lamp vanished behind us, leaving only blackness again. He stayed behind me like he had all the time in the world. I pressed the gas harder, my pulse pounding like broken glass. 80, 82, 83. The van matched every increase. My heart felt like it would burst. The next exit sign said Kettle Ridge, 1 mile. I stayed steady in the right lane, waiting until the very last second, then swerved onto the off-ramp. My tires screeched, my body slammed sideways, the whole car tilting dangerously before thudding back onto level ground. I shot a look into my mirror. The van sped past the exit, brake lights flashing red. Relief flooded me, shaky and fragile. I had lost him. I followed the ramp onto a narrow state road twisting through farmland and forest. Porch lights glowed from distant houses, scattered like lonely stars. I pulled into a closed lumber yard and turned off my headlights, breathing hard, trying to settle my shaking hands. I checked my phone. 2 bars. Enough to call emergency services. I was lifting the phone when new headlights appeared at the top of the off-ramp. My heart dropped. The van. He had circled back somehow. Maybe he found a turnaround. Or maybe he drove the wrong way down the highway. It didn't matter. He had found me. I slammed my SUV into drive and pulled out of the lot with my headlights off, following the faint glow of the moon and the pale lines on the pavement. My breathing came quick and uneven. Not even 30 seconds later, the van appeared behind me again. Then something happened that made the whole world tilt. He turned his headlights off too. Now there were 2 dark shapes racing through the trees, nothing to guide us except instinct and whatever moonlight broke through the forest. He was hunting me. Fear crawled down my spine like an icy hand. I couldn't stay dark. The road sharpened ahead, curving around a ridge. Without lights, I would drive straight into a tree. I flicked my headlights back on. The moment I did, The van flashed into view in my side mirror. He was right in my blind spot, just feet behind me, hidden until my lights revealed him. If I had braked or turned, he would have slammed into me. My scream tore out raw, and I floored the gas, taking the curve too fast. My back end swung out but caught again. He stayed behind me, pacing me like a wolf chasing a deer limping through snow. A mailbox blurred past, then another. I realized I was passing through a remote mountain neighborhood, the kind with long driveways and houses tucked far back under trees. Every window was dark. Everyone asleep. I wanted to pull into a driveway, lay on my horn, beg for help, but stopping meant death. Something inside me knew that with absolute certainty. If I stepped out of my vehicle, I would never get back in. My phone buzzed. I grabbed it and hit the speaker. It was my brother, asking where I was. Words spilled out of me in panic. Someone was chasing me. Someone was trying to run me off the road. I did not know where I was. I needed the police. I needed someone awake. He went silent for a moment, then his voice came back sharp, focused. He told me to keep driving and stay on the line. He would call emergency services from his landline. He told me to read any sign I could see. My breath came hard and fast. I read everything. County Road 20. A marker with peeling numbers. A rusted billboard for a fall festival from 3 years ago. He repeated everything back to me. The van stayed behind me, always close, never touching, like he was waiting for the perfect moment. Then up ahead I saw a glow. Fixed lights, bright white, steady. The kind that meant buildings, safety, people. As I got closer, I saw it clearly. A way station for trucks. A semi rested in the lot. Quiet, dark, but its presence meant someone was likely inside. Hope surged through me so hard it made me dizzy. I pulled into the parking lot going almost 50, hitting my brakes so hard my seatbelt dug into my ribs. I stumbled out of the car and ran toward the small building, yelling for help. Gravel crunched behind me. The van had followed, then I heard it. Sirens, faint but rising. The van stopped. I turned slowly, my breath shaking. The driver sat in the shadowed cab, staring. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his gaze, cold and patient. He watched me for what felt like forever, engine humming softly. Then he reversed fast, turned sharply, and vanished down a side road, disappearing into darkness. A door opened behind me. A trucker had climbed out of his semi, rubbing sleep from his eyes, asking what was wrong. I collapsed against the wall, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. When the police arrived 9 minutes later, I tried to explain, voice breaking. They took notes, wrote descriptions, sent patrols out along every road connected to the highway, but the van was gone. 2 weeks later, a detective called. He said 3 other women had reported almost the same experience on different mountain roads near Ridge Marker 11. High beams, tailgating, drifting close, trying to force them toward the shoulder. None of them had seen a face. None had gotten a plate. The driver was still out there. The detective said all they could do was increase patrols. I still visit my brother, but I take a longer route now, adding almost an hour to avoid those roads. I always leave during daylight, even if it means waking before dawn. At night, when I drive home from work and headlights appear behind me, my body tenses, my hands go white on the wheel. It passes after a moment, but there's always a shadow inside me whispering that one day the lights behind me won't belong to a stranger minding their own business. They'll belong to him. Sometimes, I think about the barefoot girl in the gas station, the note in her hand, the look in her eyes. I think about the couple who drove away not knowing what they had just walked into. I wonder if someone followed them too. I wonder if the hidden men I once saw by the trees, staring from between trunks near a broken down car on a different night long before this, were connected to something bigger. That night, I had slowed to help a woman waving beside a dead car, but the sight of 2 men crouching in the shadows with shapes in their hands made me speed away. That woman was smiling too widely, standing too still. She was bait. I should have reported it. I didn't. Now, every time I get behind the wheel after dark, I think about all the people who never got the chance to run. I think about how some hunters wait with patience, following you quietly, letting you believe you're safe until the moment you're not. And every time I check my mirror, there's a piece of me still stuck on that mountain road, waiting for the moment those headlights appear again, bright and blinding, chasing me through the forest. I felt watched long before I understood why. I did not know that one wrong turn in the Appalachian Mountains would drag me into something I still cannot explain. I had spent most of my life trying to avoid the kind of trouble my grandfather told me about when I was young. Stories of old mountain roads, silent woods, and people who lived so deep in the hills that even the sheriff refused to check on them. He used to say the forest remembered everything that walked inside it, and some things never left. I never believed him, not until last fall. Before all of this happened, I worked as a traveling soil technician for a farm supply company. It meant long drives, quiet towns, and endless stretches of lonely dirt roads. I was used to isolation and used to silence, but nothing prepared me for what happened in the mountains that week. I had graduated from a small college in the Midwest, nothing special, but enough to get me into a job that sent me across several states with a company truck and a clipboard. Years later, I was promoted to regional field inspector, which really meant more traveling, more nights in motels, and more hours alone behind the wheel. My last assignment that week took me near the Blue Hollow region, a rugged part of the Appalachian Mountains that ran through West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. The air there always smelled like wet pine, and the hills rose so sharply that sunlight barely touched the forest floor. Late October, leaves the color of rust and blood covered everything. It was a cold Wednesday night, around 7:45 p.m., when I finished my final visit near a tiny mountain place called Highwood Gap, a town so worn down it barely looked alive. The diner owner said outsiders usually pass through quickly, and the waitress gave me a strange warning when she served my food. She leaned in, her voice barely above a breath, and told me to leave before night settled, saying people noticed I arrived alone. I thought she was just being dramatic or trying to scare tourists, but her eyes told me something else, something worried. I brushed it off. I had one more night booked at a small lodge over in Ridgway Creek, about an hour away if I took the main route, but my GPS showed another path, a narrow forest road that cut through the mountains, saving almost 20 minutes. I was tired from 3 nights of cheap beds and early mornings. All I wanted was a hot shower and some rest. So, like an idiot, I took the shortcut. My company SUV hummed up the dark road, and the forest swallowed the sky on both sides, tall oaks and maples rising like black pillars. The air smelled cold and sharp. My phone lost signal maybe 5 minutes into the drive, and the radio turned to nothing but static. I rolled down the window a little because the heater was stuck on high, blowing hot air nonstop. The night breeze pushed pine scent into the vehicle, and everything seemed quiet, too quiet. I drove maybe 20 minutes before I saw the first sign that something was wrong. A long branch, thick and fresh, lay across the road. It looked like it had been ripped from a tree not long ago, pale wood still raw at the break. I slowed down, studying it. There was barely enough room on the right side where the pavement dropped into a shallow ditch. I eased the tires onto the dirt, crunching over loose gravel, and squeezed around the limb. As I pulled back onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The branch sat behind me, dark against the pavement. I thought for a moment about stopping to move it, but I was too tired, and the cold was settling in fast. Someone local could deal with it. I kept driving, thinking nothing of it. That lazy choice may have saved my life. 10 or 15 minutes later, I crested a small rise in the road, and something made me check my mirror again. Maybe instinct, maybe fear, maybe the forest breathing down my neck. What I saw made my whole body freeze. 2 figures stood in the road behind me, right where the branch had been. They were dragging it back into place, pulling it across the asphalt like they wanted to block the road. They weren't rushing, just moving slow and sure, like they had done this before. Their clothes looked dark, heavy, like work coats. Even from the distance, I felt their eyes on me, felt them studying my vehicle, studying me. My heart slammed in my chest. My foot pressed hard on the gas without me thinking, and the SUV surged forward. The road stretched ahead like a narrow black snake winding between the trees. I kept checking the mirror, but the two figures faded into the darkness behind me. I tried to calm myself, tried to tell myself they were just locals moving debris, but my thoughts felt twisted, wrong, shaking. No one moves a fallen limb back across a road. No one stands and stares at a passing car like that. I tried to remember the GPS map before the signal quit. The road I was on should run straight for a few more miles before connecting with a bigger route that led to Ridgeway Creek. I could do a few more miles. I could make it. The forest on both sides looked too still, like the trees were listening. My headlights barely reached 10 feet before the darkness swallowed everything. The deeper I went, the colder I felt, like something unseen walked along the edges of the road following me. When I rounded a curve, my stomach dropped. A whole tree blocked the road, not a branch, a full oak trunk, thick as a telephone pole, lying across the pavement from one side to the other. Its cuts were clean, straight, made by a chainsaw. The wood inside the trunk looked pale, fresh. This wasn't an accident. Someone felled it and dragged it here. I slammed on the brakes, the SUV skidding to a stop. My headlights lit the trunk, showing rough bark and new sawdust sprinkled across the ground. Then came the worst part. Figures stepped out from the tree line on both sides of the road, first one on the left, then another on the right, then more. I counted 5 before my brain stopped letting me count. They wore heavy jackets, boots, stained jeans, the kind of clothes mountain workers wear. But they moved with an eerie calm, slow steps. No yelling, no noise. Each of them carried something long. I saw a pipe in one hand, a sledgehammer in another, a piece of chain in someone's grip. These weren't tools for clearing trees. They were weapons. They knew I was trapped. I had maybe 20 or 30 seconds before they reached the SUV. Running into the woods would get me lost. Staying in the vehicle meant they would smash the windows and pull me out. Reversing would only take me back toward the branch they'd already placed. I felt helpless, shaking, terrified. My breath came fast, clouding the inside of the windshield. The forest seemed to close in around me. Then I noticed something. The rightmost side of the fallen tree had smaller branches attached, thin ones that cracked easily. Beyond that, a ditch sloped into an open field, rough but clear. If I hit that spot fast enough, I might break through. It was stupid, dangerous, but the only choice that wasn't suicide. I threw the SUV into reverse, flooring it. The back tires spun before gripping the road. I jerked the wheel, shifted to drive, and slammed the pedal. The vehicle lurched forward, bouncing hard as I steered toward the thinner branches. The men shouted then, harsh sounds that echoed through the trees. One lifted something like a metal bar as if ready to swing. My headlights hit the ditch, the SUV dropping sharply before rising again. Branches smashed against the hood, snapping and splintering. Something cracked the side mirror right off. The undercarriage scraped so loud it made my teeth hurt. Then, like a miracle, the vehicle burst through and plunged into the field beyond. The ground was soft, freshly worked earth. The tires slipped but caught again. I kept pushing, bouncing across rows of dirt. Behind me, I heard angry voices, faint but real. They didn't chase me in vehicles. They didn't shine lights. They didn't even run. They just watched. I drove across the field for several minutes, the SUV shaking so badly my hands hurt from gripping the wheel. Finally, I saw a light, a small farmhouse near a gravel road. I aimed straight for it, not slowing down until I rolled into the yard. A man stepped out holding a shotgun in one hand. His wife hovered behind him, already calling someone on a phone. I must have looked like a ghost, covered in dust and sweat, barely able to speak. But the man kept his gun pointed toward the dark field behind me, as if he expected something to come crawling out of the night. The sheriff arrived almost an hour later. When the deputies searched the place I described, they found nothing. No fallen tree, no branch, no footprints, nothing but broken pieces of wood scattered far off the roadside where my vehicle had smashed through. The officers exchanged looks, the kind that made me feel like they were thinking I imagined it. I knew I didn't. The next morning I drove straight out of the mountains, sticking to major highways the whole way. But something kept bothering me, a thought that wouldn't leave. So when I got home, I started researching. Online forums, local news, old missing persons records. I found stories of blocked forest roads, strange people waiting in the dark, travelers vanishing in the hills. Some escaped. Many didn't. The patterns were always the same. The isolated roads, the traps, the silence, the mountain people no one talked about. And I remembered something I hadn't told the deputies. Before the shortcut road, before the forest, back in Highwood Gap, the waitress warned me to leave because people noticed I arrived alone. She wasn't lying. She wasn't dramatic. She knew something. She had seen something. She recognized the signs. I tried to forget everything, but the memories kept coming. The branch behind me, the tree across the road, the men walking out of the forest, the way they didn't rush, didn't speak, didn't show fear. Like hunters, like predators that had done it many times before. A few weeks later, while staying at a small lodge in another mountain town for work, I ran into a new horror of my own. Every time I came back from my daily routes, my suitcase looked different. Clothes moved, items rearranged. Nothing taken, nothing added, just touched. Like someone was checking what I owned. The lodge claimed no one entered my room, but something did. Someone. And there was one more thing, something that still keeps me awake. On a rainy night the next week, I picked up a hitchhiker on a mountain pass, thinking I was helping someone stuck in the storm. He sat stiff in the passenger seat, water dripping from his coat. He asked strange questions. Where I lived, who waited for me at home, if I told anyone where I was going. When I dropped him near a trailhead, he watched me drive away without blinking, his eyes following the vehicle until the trees hid him. I realized then that the mountains didn't forget people. They remembered, they watched. And some of the people living inside them watched too. I never thought a quiet drive through the Appalachian Mountains would change the shape of my life, but that night still crawls inside me like something alive. Before I ever stepped foot on that mountain road, I lived my whole life in a crowded little town in southern Indiana where nothing ever changed. Not the cracked sidewalks, not the same tired houses, not the same neighbors who still remembered me as the shy kid who never knew where she fit. I had spent years stuck in a low-paying job in a dusty hardware shop. The kind of place where the radio played the same old country songs and the doorbell rang every time someone who already knew your name walked in. When a friend from college told me about a seasonal work deal in a wildlife visitor center deep in the Appalachia region of West Virginia, I thought maybe this was what starting over looked like. I had turned 28 only a few weeks earlier, and something inside me kept whispering that if I did not leave my old life then, I might never leave at all. I packed everything I owned into my silver Jeep, the one with fading paint and a stubborn air conditioner, and I decided to leave before the sun came up. My plan was simple, or at least it felt that way. A long drive through Indiana, across the Ohio border, then deeper and deeper into mountain country until I reached my rental cabin by next morning. I had made part of this drive during the day once before, and the route had felt harmless enough. What I did not understand was how the mountains change when night swallows everything, how the forest grows a different voice in darkness, how the road seems older than the ground beneath it. By the time I left the last familiar town behind, the air was growing colder and the sky had turned the color of ink. I crossed into the mountains long after sunset, somewhere between two tiny places whose names I could barely pronounce, places with one gas pump and an old billboard leaning sideways like it wanted to fall. My radio died miles back, giving nothing but static mixed with faint voices I could not understand, like whispers trapped inside long tunnels. My phone had no bars at all, not even one lonely dot. The world outside my headlights looked unreal, like someone had painted black walls around the road. Trees pressed close to the pavement, tall and spindly, their branches looking like long fingers stretching toward me. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I still sipped it to stay awake, forcing my eyes to fight the heavy pull of exhaustion. For a while, the only sound I heard was the hum of my tires on the old asphalt. Then I noticed the heat gauge on my dashboard start to climb. At first it moved so slow that I convinced myself I imagined it. But then the needle pushed harder and harder toward the red, like something inside the engine was choking. My Jeep had never given me trouble with overheating, not once, but the mountains had a way of turning simple things into warnings. I felt my throat tighten. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe just the steep climb. But within minutes, steam curled up from under the hood, white and ghost-like, drifting across my windshield until the road disappeared behind mist. I eased onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires, even though I could not see where the road ended and the drop-off began. When I turned off the engine, silence hit harder than any sound could have. No insects humming, no breeze rustling the leaves, no distant cars, no life at all. Only the clicking of hot metal and the beat of my pulse hammering in my ears. I stayed inside the Jeep, gripping the wheel, telling myself that engines overheat all the time, that this was only a delay. But I knew I was lying to myself. My phone still had no service. The nearest town was at least 15 miles behind me, maybe more, and ahead of me there was nothing but forests old enough to remember every person who ever got lost inside them. I reached down and pulled the hood release, but did not step out. I remembered something my uncle once told me when I was little, that you should let an overheated engine breathe for a while before messing with it. The dashboard clock read something like 1:17 a.m., or as my brain twisted it in my panic, 1:17 after midnight, a time too deep in the dark for any good thing to happen. I told myself I would wait 15 minutes, maybe 20, then check the coolant. I leaned back in my seat and tried slow breathing, but each inhale felt tight, like the forest had stolen half the air. Then I saw lights in my rearview mirror. They were small at first, a soft glow coming up from the winding road behind me. Relief washed through me so quickly it almost made me dizzy, but that relief shattered like thin glass when the headlights suddenly went out. The engine sound still approached, low and rumbling, thick like an old truck struggling up a hill. Whoever was driving had turned their lights off completely in the darkest stretch of the mountain. My first instinct was to flee, to force my Jeep back onto the road even if the engine screamed, but my hands froze. I could not move. I watched in the mirror as the shape crept out of the darkness, a battered truck that looked like it came from another decade. Its paint was dull and patchy, like something had scraped it many times. It pulled up behind me, maybe 30 feet back, and stopped. The engine turned off. Nothing moved. A long stretch of silent seconds passed. I could not breathe. Then the driver door opened with a creaking sound that echoed through the forest. A tall man stepped out, lean and long-limbed, wearing heavy dark clothes that looked too warm for the mountain night. I could not see his face, only his shape, lit faintly by the moon hiding between clouds. His hands hung just behind his sides, like he was hiding something. I hit the lock button out of instinct, even though the doors were already locked. The click felt like a shout inside the silence. The man walked closer, slow and steady, like he had no fear of me or anything else in the world. He stopped just a few feet from my window and tilted his head like he was studying me. Then he said my name, not loud, not angry, just my name spoken soft and calm like he knew me. I froze. I had not told anyone on this road who I was. I had not stopped anywhere except the lonely gas pump hours back where I paid outside and kept my head down. My bags were tucked in the back with no visible tags. There was no possible way he could know my name. My voice died in my throat. I sat still, unable to answer. The man leaned down just slightly, enough that the faint glow of my dashboard touched his face. He looked older than I thought, maybe in his late 50s, with skin lined by years of hard weather and sun. His eyes looked pale, almost washed out. He had a deep scar running from his forehead down to his cheek, long-healed but crooked. His lips were cracked like dried earth. "Engine trouble," he said, not asking, just saying it. "I can help. I can help." "Pop the hood and step out a minute." He spoke like someone offering help to a neighbor, but his eyes did not blink. Not once, and they never moved away from my face. Something about him made every nerve in my body scream at me to stay inside. I shook my head and whispered that I had already called for help. The lie felt thin, like tissue paper. He smiled at that, slow, stretching in a way that made my stomach twist. "No phone service here," he said. "Checked myself 7 miles back. Nothing until you cross the East Ridge." He knew I was lying. He knew I was trapped. He began walking around my Jeep with slow, steady steps, dragging his fingers along the metal as he moved. The sound of his nails scraping across the hood made me flinch. He circled toward the passenger side and tapped the window 3 times. Tap, 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 like someone knocking politely to come inside your home. "You should not be alone on these roads," he said. "Bad things find women out here." He continued circling until he reached the back of my Jeep. He ran his hand across the trunk as if petting something alive. My chest tightened. I thought about the pepper spray buried in my bag on the passenger seat, but reaching for it meant looking away from him for too long. I could not risk it. He came back to my door and grabbed the handle. He yanked. Hard. Hard. The door rattled but stayed locked. I let out a small cry before I could stop myself. He did not get angry. He just looked amused, like this was some kind of game. He leaned close to the slight gap at the top of the window where the old rubber seal had worn away, his breath fogged against the glass. He smelled like smoke, oil, and something rotten beneath it. "Been waiting to see you come down this road," he whispered. "Knew you'd pass sooner or later." My mind spun. How could he have been waiting for me? I had chosen this route only days ago. I had not posted about it, not told anyone except my friend who worked at the visitor center. None of this made sense. The forest seemed to press tighter around me, holding its breath. Before I could process anything, new headlights appeared on the road ahead. Bright, steady, coming fast. The man straightened, not slowly this time, but sharply, like a startled animal. The approaching lights washed the trees in white. He turned and looked at me one last time. His expression was not anger, not even surprise. It was disappointment, like someone whose fun had been interrupted. "Another time," he said. He walked back to his truck with calm steps, climbed in, and drove off without turning on his lights, the truck disappearing into the dark like the forest swallowed it whole. The approaching vehicle pulled up behind me. A couple stepped out, carrying a flashlight and a jug of coolant. They helped me refill my Jeep and made sure I could drive again. They seemed confused when I could barely speak. The woman asked if someone had stopped before they arrived, but I could not bring myself to describe him. I just nodded weakly. They followed me all the way to the next small town with bright lights and an all-night diner. I sat there for hours shaking, calling the local ranger office. When the officers came, they seemed polite but doubtful. Without a plate number or clear details, there was little they could do. I slept in a cheap motel that night with the lamp on because turning it off made my chest tight. It took me 3 weeks to learn how he knew my name. The answer made everything worse. That tiny gas station miles before the mountains, the one I stopped at dozens of times over the years on random trips, had a rewards program linked to my card. Whenever I paid at the pump, my name appeared on the screen inside for anyone working there to see. Anyone with access could have memorized it. Maybe he worked there. Maybe he knew someone who did. Maybe he saw my Jeep pass enough times to learn its routine. But he said he had waited for me. I still think about the truck stop restroom I used earlier that night, the one with messages carved on the stall door. Names and dates etched into the old wood, some scratched out violently. I thought it was only vandalism, but now I wonder if those names were not jokes. If they were warnings, if they were lists. Sometimes I think about the lost tourist I saw helplessly asking for directions while 2 old men kept changing their story, guiding him deeper into narrow back roads that led nowhere on any map. He kept thanking them, believing their strange smiles. I wonder now if he ever found his way out. Sometimes I think about the rideshare driver I once overheard at a diner months before my trip. He said he got a request from deep inside the forest, a place with no GPS data at all, where a young girl waited beside a man who spoke for her every time she tried to talk. The driver left without looking back. Sometimes I think the forest knows things people forget. Now I live in a small town near the visitor center, and though the mountains are beautiful in daylight, I never drive the old ridge road at night. When I visit my family back home, I do not take my Jeep, I fly. I changed every card I own and stopped using automatic payments at pumps. I bought a new car with stronger locks. I keep my doors bolted even in daylight. I try not to imagine what would have happened if that couple had not appeared when they did, if their headlights had not cut through the dark at that exact moment. I try not to wonder if the man in the old truck still drives those roads at night looking for someone else whose engine might fail at the wrong time. I try not to wonder if he still remembers my name. I always thought I understood danger, like I had lived enough years to sense when something felt wrong before it even happened. I never believed how fast that confidence could crumble until the night I drove into the Appalachian Mountains and found myself alone on a forest road that no one sane would travel after sundown. My name is Jonah, and before all this, I used to work as a travel photographer for small magazines, the kind that paid just enough for gas money and cheap meals. My childhood was spent in a coal mining town on the edge of the Appalachian Trail, where stories of things in the woods were treated like weather reports, casual warnings spoken by old folks who chewed tobacco and stared too long at the tree line. When I was little, my grandmother once told me that the mountains were older than time and that they remembered every living thing that crossed their spine, especially those who walked their roads alone. I laughed at that for years. I do not laugh anymore. I was returning home after spending 2 days filming a seasonal event in a town far south of where I lived. I could have stayed the night, but I had a meeting early the next morning, and I thought the forest road that cut straight through the mountains would save me a full hour. It was already 7:25 p.m. when I started the climb. The sun had dropped behind the ridges, and the sky was the color of dying embers. I felt fine about the drive because I had taken this road before, though never this late, and never during the colder months when the fog sinks into the valleys like wet wool. About 30 minutes into the climb, I noticed I had not passed a single car. Not even a tourist rental, which was strange because the area was usually crowded with hikers. I pushed the thought aside and kept sipping gas station coffee, trying to keep myself awake. The pavement wound upward in narrow bends, tree branches hanging low like bony arms that reached toward the road. I turned on the radio to break the silence, but the only station picking up was an oldies channel that faded in and out with static, the song stretching and warping like someone was pulling the sound apart. The deeper I drove, the darker it got. My headlights barely reached the shoulder and fog crawled across the ground, swirling like pale smoke. I kept checking the clock, watching the minutes crawl by, telling myself I only needed to reach the highway on the other side. That was when I saw it. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, tiny at first, then growing brighter as the vehicle behind me gained speed. I felt relief at first. Another driver meant I was not alone on the mountain, but relief fell away when the car shifted directly behind me and stayed there, close enough that I could make out its outline. A gray sedan, maybe older, maybe newer. I could not tell through the mist. Then a small blue flashing light came on inside the windshield. Not a full bar like highway patrol, just a single round bulb, faint and unnatural, like a cheap toy. I slowed down, drifted slightly to the right, hoping the car would pass. It did not. It stayed so close I could not even see its license plate. My stomach tightened. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. Like a memory waking up from childhood when my grandmother told me to never trust lights in the mountains that do not belong to the sky. I tapped my brake lightly, the red glow flashing on the wet road. The car behind me mimicked the movement exactly. I felt a cold chill creep from my chest to my fingertips. I remembered a piece of advice my father once gave me when I first started driving long distances for work. He said that if anyone ever tried to pull me over in a remote spot and something felt off, I should slow down, turn on my hazard lights, and head for a public area no matter what. The closest town had a gas station that stayed open until midnight. If I could just get there, I might be fine. I slowed to 20 miles an hour, turned on my hazards, and kept moving forward. The blue light flickered, then a short burst from a siren echoed through the trees, sharp and hollow like it came from the bottom of a well. I jumped in my seat. The road did not have many places to stop, but a wider patch of dirt shoulder appeared on my right. After hesitation that felt like a full minute, I pulled over. The other car followed immediately and stopped behind me. Its headlights pointed directly into my mirrors, flooding my eyes with blinding light. I rolled my window down only a small amount, enough to speak through. The forest around us was dead silent, no birds, no wind, nothing but the soft hum of my engine. The driver behind me did not step out right away. He sat in the car so long that I wondered if he was even real. Then I heard a car door slam, slow and deliberate, and heavy footsteps approached from behind. I felt my throat go dry. The man who stepped into view was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark forest green pants and a heavy jacket with no patches of any kind. No reflective stripes. No gear. Nothing that looked official. His flashlight beam shot into my eyes, forcing me to squint. He did not greet me. He did not ask for my license. His first words were a low, irritated growl that I barely heard over the pounding of my heart. He told me that my driving looked suspicious and that slowing down on a mountain road suggested I was hiding something. I tried to stay calm, speaking slowly, telling him I was unsure if he was real law enforcement. He stared at me through the narrow window gap, and I saw something cold in his eyes, a pale emptiness, like he had not slept in years. He leaned closer, the beam of his flashlight scanning my dashboard, my passenger seat, my back seat. The light paused on my backpack, and he asked what was inside. I said gear, camera equipment, and personal items. He made a low grunt that made my skin prickle. Then he told me to step out of the vehicle for something he called a compliance check. I had never heard those words used together in my life. I felt a rising panic and said I would cooperate only if he showed identification. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a wallet, flipped it open for just an instant, long enough for me to see what looked like a badge, but with the center scraped out as if someone had clawed it with metal. I felt a bolt of fear shoot through me. He snapped it closed and told me again to step out. I refused. He struck the top of my window frame with his palm so hard it shook the whole car, and he said people who travel alone in the mountains usually hide things they do not want found. My pulse hammered so loudly in my ears that I barely heard him. He walked away from my window then, moving toward the back of my car. I saw him crouch in the red glow of my taillights, looking at my license plate, his fingers brushing the metal like he was memorizing it. A moment later, he walked along the passenger side, running the flashlight beam across every inch of my car. Then he grabbed the handle of the passenger door and pulled twice. Locked. Thank God I always locked everything the moment I started driving. He stared through the window, the beam of light resting on my face. His expression stayed blank. No anger, no curiosity, just a hollow stare that reminded me of dead animals I used to see near the coal tracks as a kid. He tapped on the glass 3 slow times and told me I was making this harder than it needed to be. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. Before I could dial, headlights appeared from behind us, distant at first, then growing brighter. I watched his posture change, his shoulders tensing beneath his jacket. He turned toward the road, watching the approaching vehicle. It was some kind of truck or SUV, its lights bouncing over the uneven pavement. He stood still for several seconds, then walked calmly back to his car. He climbed in but did not turn on his headlights. He waited until the approaching truck was within a few hundred feet, then pulled out onto the road with no lights at all, disappearing into the fog like a shadow being swallowed by darkness. I sat frozen, my breath held in my throat, until the truck passed me. The driver did not even look in my direction. He just kept driving. I stayed parked in that spot for almost 15 minutes, until my hands stopped trembling. When I finally pulled back onto the road, I drove far below the speed limit until I reached the next town. I stopped at a motel with a rusted sign and a parking lot filled with only 2 cars. The clerk at the desk was half asleep, rubbing his eyes as he handed me a key card. He told me the place was nearly empty and that he put me in their quietest room. When I reached the door, the key slid through the lock, but the door was already cracked open. I pushed it gently and stopped cold when I saw a woman sitting on the bed in the dark. Her hair covered half her face, and she whispered that the clerk had done this before. She said someone else had a key to this room. Before I could respond, I heard soft footsteps outside the window, slow and deliberate, circling the building. The woman grabbed her backpack and rushed past me, slipping into the night like she had been waiting for the chance to run. I slammed the door and locked it, shoving a chair under the handle. I did not sleep, not even for a minute. Hours later, when I left the motel and continued through the mountains, I pulled over again near an overlook to record footage for a vlog I had been planning. I decided to live stream instead, hoping the audience chat would keep me from feeling so alone. As I filmed the trees below and talked about the fog, messages began flooding in, telling me not to turn around, begging me to get in my car immediately. People in the chat said there was a man standing behind my trunk, a tall man wearing dark clothes. I spun around so fast the camera shook. No one was there. I shut off the stream and drove away, trying to steady my breathing. Night came again before I made it out of the range. I stopped for fuel at a forest campground where a family parked their RV, cooking dinner over a small fire. They seemed friendly, normal, and the father even waved me over to warm my hands. But at 3 a.m, I woke to sharp knocking on the side of my car. When I wiped the fog from my window, a woman was standing there, barefoot, shaking, claiming she was running from traffickers in the woods. Her eyes looked wild, like she had sprinted for miles. The father from the RV stepped out, whispering for me not to open the door. He pointed behind her, toward the forest, where tall silhouettes shifted between the trees. I could not tell if they were people or shadows, but the woman outside stopped pleading and tilted her head like she was listening to something behind her. Then she walked slowly into the woods and vanished. The father said nothing else. He locked up their RV, and I did not see their lights come on again. By the time I reached the last stretch of road out of the Appalachians, the sky was pale, and the mountains behind me were swallowed in fog. I drove until I reached my hometown, and I never took that forest road again. I tried reporting what happened, but the local station said something vague about imposter officers and mountain wanderers. They sounded tired, like they had heard the story too many times. They said the mountain roads are full of ghosts, some still breathing, some not. I still drive for work, but never at night, and never alone. And sometimes, when I check my rearview mirror, I swear I see a faint blue light flicker in the distance, pulsing like a heartbeat that refuses to die. I never imagined one choice on a quiet mountain road could split my life into a before and an after, yet I still hear that night echo inside me like a whisper that never fades. I was driving through the Appalachian highlands after a friend's wedding in a small town near the Blue Ridge, thinking I knew the back roads well enough to make it home before the sky turned black. I had grown up in these mountains, worked for years in a small clinic in a valley town, and believed the forest might be wild but never cruel. I was wrong, and I learned too late that these old hills keep their secrets the same way a river keeps its stones, hidden until you step on the wrong one. My name is Mark, and I had always thought life was steady for me. I had studied at a community college in Tennessee, worked 12 years in rural health outreach, and spent most of my weekends hiking or driving the same ridges my grandparents once told stories about. My family's land sat just beyond an old mining trail, and growing up, I used to hear tales about people vanishing on mountain roads or strangers showing up at cabins after dark with no explanation of where they had come from. I never believed those stories, but looking back now, I think the mountains were trying to warn me long before that night arrived. The wedding had ended late, and when I finally said goodbye to everyone, the sun had already dipped behind the peaks, leaving streaks of deep red and purple along the horizon. I checked my GPS and saw a detour ahead that would add almost 40 minutes to the trip. I didn't feel like dealing with that, not after a long day of celebrating, so I zoomed out on the map until I found an old service road that cut through national forest land. It looked harmless on the screen, just a thin gray line curling between tall ridges like a lazy creek, and I convinced myself it would be faster. The first stretch felt peaceful enough, the kind of calm only the Appalachians can create when the wind threads through the hemlocks and the dark settles like a soft blanket. The trees pressed close to the road, forming a narrow tunnel above my car, and the beams of my headlights pushed through layers of moss and ferns that glowed like green fire. After a few miles, I passed a single cabin with a light burning in the window, but then everything behind it slipped into pure wilderness. My phone lost service almost immediately, which I expected out here, and I had already downloaded the map, so I felt no worry at all. The air smelled like pine and wet earth, and the radio hummed softly with slow bluegrass music that matched the rhythm of the winding road. I checked the dashboard clock, which read 7:58 p.m. or 7:58 p.m. as I would later remember it when replaying every minute in my mind. I figured I had maybe 12 more miles before the road joined the highway, so I relaxed slightly, letting my hands drift with the turns. The road twisted left, then right, then left again, like a snake curling around the bones of the mountain. I felt almost hypnotized by the movement until everything changed in one heartbeat. As I rounded a sharp bend, my headlights struck an old dark blue sedan standing sideways across both lanes. The car looked decades old, with rust chewing through the sides and faded paint that looked nearly black in the low light. Both front doors stood open like someone had run out in a hurry, and the hazard lights blinked slowly, their weak amber glow flickering like a dying heartbeat. I felt my own pulse jump. At first glance, the scene looked like a crash, so I eased my foot off the gas and rolled to a stop about 30 feet behind the car. But something felt wrong the moment I stopped. The sedan had no dents, no shattered glass, no tire marks on the road. It looked placed there, almost positioned like some kind of barrier meant to stop anyone passing through. My headlights washed over the empty seats, the fast food bag crumpled on the dashboard, and the road around it, which looked disturbingly untouched. I told myself to stay calm as I leaned forward, scanning the area through the windshield, but my chest tightened with a kind of dread I had never felt before. I reached instinctively for my phone before remembering there was no service. I was still holding it when something twitched in the corner of my eye. At first, I thought maybe a deer or a bear had been disturbed by my arrival, but then I saw the small metallic flash, something reflecting my headlights. And then I saw them. A pair of thick work boots stood behind a stump about 20 feet into the trees on the right. The boots were planted firmly in the dirt. They were not moving, not shifting, not stepping out into the open. They were waiting. A sharp wave of cold rolled down my spine, and before I could take another breath, I spotted movement on the other side of the road. A second person was crouched low behind a cluster of ferns, their body pressed tight against the earth, watching my car with a stillness that did not feel human at all. The shape of a hood, the curve of shoulders, the tilt of a head following my slightest motion. Two strangers hiding on either side of a blocked road deep in the mountains. Nothing about this place, this hour, or this silence felt like an accident. My instincts screamed at me to leave, and it happened so fast that I did not even think. My foot slammed on the gas pedal, sending my car flying backward down the road. The steering wheel jerked under my hands as I tried to keep the tires straight. The road behind me was pitch black, and the beams of my taillights barely lit the white edge line enough for me to follow it. I risked a glance forward just long enough to see both hidden men burst out from the trees. They were sprinting. Fast. Too fast. Too fast. One of them, the one near the ferns, pulled something from his jacket, something dark and rigid that caught the light, and it felt like someone had gripped the back of my throat. I pushed the accelerator harder, my engine screaming as the car lurched and rattled on the uneven pavement. Shouts echoed across the road, two angry voices rising over the sound of the forest, and then the right rear tire slammed into a pothole I had not seen, throwing me hard against the seatbelt. The car fishtailed wildly, and for a second I thought I would spin into the ditch, but I managed to crank the wheel just enough to pull the car back into the lane. Through the windshield, I saw one of the men stop running and lift a phone to his face. He was taking a picture of my license plate. The other kept coming, his strides long and powerful, gaining fast. My heart hammered so violently I felt it in my ears. The road ahead, which was behind me since I was reversing, bent sharply to the right around a drop-off. I remembered the yellow warning sign from earlier, and I knew if I reached that turn going backward this fast, I would fly straight into the ravine. I had seconds. Less. I could not keep reversing. I could not stop. I could not let them reach my window, so I made a decision I had no business making. I cut the wheel hard and slammed one foot on the brake while keeping the other on the gas. The car groaned in protest, the tires shrieking across the pavement as the back whipped sideways. My stomach lurched as the world spun around me. Trees blurred. The beams of my headlights sliced through empty air. The entire car swung like a pendulum before slamming into a perfect forward position on the road. I still do not know how I managed it, whether it was instinct or pure luck, but the moment the car straightened, my foot hit the gas, and I shot forward down the mountain road. In the rear mirror, I saw the man chasing me stop in the middle of the lane, framed in red light. The one with the phone stepped back toward the sedan. I drove faster, the forest streaking past in frantic smears of darkness and branches. Every twist of the road felt too sharp. Every shadow felt like something waiting to step out. My hands shook so badly on the wheel that I nearly drifted across the line twice. I could barely breathe, and a thin whine escaped my throat without me realizing it. I must have driven several miles without seeing or hearing anything behind me, but I did not slow. All I could think was that I needed people, light, sound, anything that felt alive and safe. The road seemed to stretch forever, but eventually the trees thinned. A faint glow appeared ahead, spilling upward from behind a hill, and my body nearly collapsed with relief. Civilization. The highway. As soon as I reached the first gas station, a small place with bright fluorescent lights flickering over the pumps, I pulled into the parking lot at an angle that made no sense. I barely managed to open the car door before I stepped out and vomited on the pavement. A teenager collecting carts from the nearby store froze and stared at me like I had burst out of the woods covered in blood. A woman filling her tank hurried over and asked if I was all right, but I could not speak. My hands were shaking so hard that I thought they might snap. The woman ended up calling 911 while keeping a hand lightly on my arm. She told me to breathe slowly. I tried, but my lungs felt tight, like the cold mountain air had followed me all the way down. When 2 sheriff deputies arrived, I finally managed to tell them everything. The sedan, the hidden men, the sprinting, the object one of them pulled from his jacket, the picture of my license plate, the reverse, the spin, the chase. The officers exchanged a look I did not miss, a look that said this was not new to them. One of them, a broad man with a short beard, told me quietly that there had been several similar incidents on isolated mountain roads over the past few months. Cars blocking lanes, people waving down drivers with fake emergencies. A couple of the victims had been robbed and beaten. One college student had accepted a ride from someone after her car died, only to discover the interior door handles were missing. Another traveler had reported that the same man kept entering every rest stop bathroom she used across 3 counties, standing silently near the sink every time she walked out of a stall. And one woman, alone like me, had vanished. Her car had been found 2 weeks later in an empty field with the doors ripped off and her purse still inside. She had never been located. When they sent a patrol to check the road I described, the sedan was gone. No tracks, no boot prints, no debris, nothing at all. It was as if the forest swallowed the evidence whole. All I had was a scraped bumper and a mind full of images I could not forget if I tried. The officers said they would file my report and keep watch on the area, but their voices carried a heaviness like they already knew that night would not give them answers. In the days that followed, I changed my license plate, installed a dash cam, and refused to take any back roads, even in daylight. For months, every time I saw a car pulled over on the side of a rural road, my chest tightened. I kept thinking about that hidden object in the man's hand, and the long strides of the other one running toward my car. At night, when I closed my eyes, I saw the phone lifted toward my plate, and I heard again the echo of their shouts through the trees. But something else stayed with me too, something stranger. When I looked back on the moment I turned around, I realized I had no memory of thinking, no planning, no reason. My body acted entirely on its own, as if some old instinct had reached up from the bones of the mountains and pushed me in the only direction that would keep me alive. Sometimes I wonder if the stories my grandparents told were not warnings at all, but reminders, that the Appalachians may be ancient and quiet, but they are not empty. And sometimes, when the wind slips through the trees in just the right way at dusk, I feel that same cold whisper again. Now, even years later, when I drive along any lonely mountain road and the forest grows too deep and the sky grows too dark, I press the gas pedal just a little harder. Because I know how close I came to disappearing, and I know the mountains are patient. They wait, they watch, and they do not forget the ones who escaped. I kept telling myself the mountains were beautiful, even though they felt like they were swallowing the road whole. I had no idea the worst night of my life was about to start with something as small as a flat tire. My name is Mara, 26 years old, raised in a quiet little town where people still left their doors unlocked, and working as an assistant at an insurance office in Clearwater Ridge. Nothing special, nothing exciting, just a tired woman trying to find a reason to feel like her life meant something. After my last relationship collapsed like wet paper and my job turned into a non-stop grind of emails and claims, I needed space to breathe. So when my cousin invited me to his birthday weekend in a mountain town called Ember Hollow, deep in the Appalachian range, I thought a long drive alone might calm my head. I booked a small cabin along the way, owned by a host named Daniel Ridgway. The pictures showed a warm wooden place between tall pines with bright windows facing the mountains. The listing had great reviews, except one comment that said the host had installed new locks on the outside of the cabin doors and claimed they were for keeping wildlife out. I did not think much of it. People in the mountains did strange things sometimes. The drive began smooth, long highways bending around rolling hills and wide valleys, and for the first several hours, I felt like maybe this road trip would actually help me clear my mind. But trouble always starts when you least expect it, and by the time it did, the sun was already sliding behind the jagged peaks like someone pulling down a curtain. 2 hours into what should have been a 5-hour trip, an accident ahead forced all drivers onto back roads. My GPS kept recalculating until it pushed me onto a narrow path twisting deep between black trees. The screen on my phone flickered as the signal dropped to 1 bar, then nothing, then 1 bar again, like it was trying to warn me that I was heading someplace my phone did not want to follow. The shadows grew long across the cracked pavement, and the Appalachian forest pressed close on both sides like it was leaning in to listen. After maybe 30 minutes without seeing another car, the quiet felt too perfect. No rustling of animals, no wind, not even the low hum of insects, just thick, watchful silence. It should have scared me, but all I wanted was to reach the cabin before night fully took the sky. That was when my steering wheel jerked to the right. The car shuddered hard and a loud flapping sound slammed through the air. I pulled over fast onto a narrow dirt shoulder barely wider than my vehicle, my heart thumping as I stepped out. My front passenger tire was shredded, torn apart like something had ripped it from the inside. For a few seconds, I just stood there listening. No birds. No engines. The only sound was the ticking of my cooling car. The forest felt alive but hiding, like the trees were holding their breath and waiting to see what I would do. I checked my trunk and cursed under my breath when I remembered my spare was the tiny temporary kind, the one I had never learned to use. My phone still flickered with a weak signal that kept dying every time I tried to call roadside help. I held the phone up in different angles like a fool, hoping the mountains would take pity on me. That was when I saw the headlights. They came slowly around the bend behind me, moving at a careful creep that made the hair on my arms rise. A tow truck. Yellow lights glowing on top like it had been patrolling the forest, waiting for me to break down. The truck stopped behind my car and a man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with a lanky body and long arms that hung low like they were a little too big for him. His face was lined with deep creases that made guessing his age impossible, and he wore a dark work shirt with no name tag. His hair was cut short, almost military tight, and he had this strange habit of tilting his head when he looked at me, like he was trying to hear something inside my skull. He smiled wide, but his eyes stayed flat. When he talked, his voice was calm in a rehearsed way, smooth but empty, like he had practiced being gentle. He said he saw my hazard lights from far back and wanted to help. I thanked him, but told him I had already called my insurance, even though I had not actually reached anyone. He nodded slowly, then told me all the mountain repair shops were closed at this hour, and my only safe choice was to let him tow me to a private lot about 7 miles down the road. Something in my stomach twisted when he said the words, "private lot." I told him I would wait for my insurance, and he did not move. He just stood there with his hands deep in his pockets, head tilted, studying me like a puzzle he already knew the answer to. When the smile dropped from his face, the cold air felt heavier. He said waiting here after dark was a bad idea, that things happened on this stretch of road. People hurt, cars stolen, strange incidents. The way he said the word incidents made my mouth go dry. When he stepped closer, I caught the strong smell of cigarettes mixed with something metallic like rust or old blood trapped in fabric. His voice slid lower. He said he was only trying to help because I was a young woman alone on a dead road, and not everyone out here had good intentions. The way he said the last part felt less like a warning and more like a threat wearing a thin mask of concern. I told him again that I was fine and that help was coming. He stared at me long enough that my heartbeat became a drum inside my chest. Then he walked back to his truck and leaned against the door, arms crossed, eyes fixed on me. Watching like a predator waiting for its moment, I rushed back into my car, locked every door, and tried calling again. This time, a sliver of signal caught just long enough for me to reach my cousin. His voice cracked with static, but I told him everything: the forest, the flat tire, the strange man, the mile marker I thought I had passed. He told me he would call the sheriff and find help. Then the call vanished. The few seconds of connection felt like someone throwing me a rope while I dangled over a cliff. I clutched my phone and tried to slow my breathing while the battery dropped to 20%. The tow truck driver still had not moved. His silhouette leaned against the truck, not shifting, not pacing, just watching. The forest around us stayed still, like it wanted to hide what was happening. Minutes stretched out thin like rubber bands ready to snap. Then he started walking toward my car again. His steps were more determined this time, his shoulders stiff, his head not tilted anymore. He knocked on my window and I cracked it barely an inch. His voice had lost any softness he pretended before. He said I was making a mistake, that my phone would not work here, that nobody was coming. He said he had been doing this for many years and knew exactly how nights like this ended. When I asked him what he meant by doing this, he hesitated just half a second, like he had said more than he meant to. His eyes twitched and he quickly said he meant towing cars. But something in his face told me he was lying. I told him to leave me alone or I would call the police. He laughed, but it was a laugh without any warmth, dry and sharp. He told me to go ahead and try, since my phone barely worked and the nearest sheriff was more than 30 minutes away, even if they left right then. He listed those details with too much confidence, like he knew every inch of this mountain road. That was when fear turned into something stronger. Survival. I rolled up my window fast, put my car in drive, and pressed the gas. The metal rims scraped the pavement and sparks shot out behind me. The sound was horrible, but I did not care. I would ruin my car before I let him take me anywhere. For a moment, he stood still in the middle of the road, then he ran to his truck. In my mirror, I saw him climb in and begin following me. He did not rush. He did not honk. He just kept a steady distance, his headlights cutting into my mirrors like white knives. I drove like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 2 miles. My wheels shaking so hard my hands hurt, sparks flying from the rim. The forest was so dark it felt endless. No houses, no towns, not even a mailbox. Just twisting Appalachian road and the silent truck stalking behind me. Then I saw flashing lights ahead, red and blue cutting through the darkness like a miracle. I started crying before I even reached the cruiser. A deputy from the Pine County Sheriff's Office had been searching the mountain road after my cousin called. I pulled beside him and stumbled out of my car, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. The deputy kept one hand on his holster as he looked behind me. About 100 yards back, the tow truck had stopped. For a moment, it idled quietly. Then it made a slow, calm U-turn and disappeared down the road like melting into the trees. No rush, no fear. Just a man who had done this before. The deputy brought me into his cruiser, gave me water, and listened carefully as I told him every detail. When I mentioned the writing on the tow truck, his eyebrows pulled together. I told him it said Mountain Crest Recovery or something close to that, but the lettering looked uneven, like someone stuck it on last minute. He typed into the computer and waited. When he looked back at me, the concern on his face made my stomach twist into knots. He said there was no towing company by that name anywhere in the entire region. Then he asked if I remembered the license plate. I told him it was a West Virginia plate starting with RKC, or at least I thought so. He ran it through the system. After a long pause, he said the plate did not belong to any tow truck. It belonged to a missing pickup truck reported stolen 3 months earlier. Backup arrived soon after. A real tow service from the next town came to take my ruined car. While we waited, the deputy told me about strange activity around these back roads in the past year. Cars vanishing. Drivers missing for hours. People found wandering the forest confused and unable to recall what happened. A woman had once trusted a helpful tow driver who took her to a repair shop that never existed. Her car was later found stripped inside an abandoned coal barn nearly 20 miles away. Descriptions were always vague. Medium height, average face, forgettable voice. But the man I saw was not forgettable. And when I described him, the deputy wrote down every detail like he believed my words might finally connect pieces they had been missing. When the deputies finished gathering information, they took me to the small sheriff's station in Ember Hollow, where my cousin met me. I fell apart in his arms as soon as I saw him. My clothes smelled like fear and engine smoke. My hands would not stop shaking. They showed me pictures of suspects in the region, but none matched the man who followed me. They gave me a case number, a card for a victim's advocate, and told me they would call if they found anything. They never did. The next morning, I reached the cabin I had booked earlier. The host greeted me kindly, but something bothered me the moment he showed me around. The locks on the outside of the bedroom door were real, heavy metal latches that only someone standing in the hallway could close. He laughed them off and said they were only for bear safety. I could not sleep that night, and by dawn I drove away without staying the second night. On my way out of town, I stopped at a diner for coffee. Near the entrance was a missing persons flyer with a picture of a woman wearing the exact same jacket I saw someone wearing earlier at a gas station restroom hours before my tire blew. She had walked past me quietly, head down, her hair messy, eyes wide like a trapped animal. The poster said she vanished 3 weeks ago. I stared at her picture until the edges blurred. I kept thinking about the tow truck man, the calm way he stood in the road, the slow U-turn, the things he said, the people who went missing. It has been months since that night, and I still avoid mountain roads after dark. Sometimes late at night when I cannot sleep, I imagine him still driving those lonely Appalachian trails with fake letters on his truck and stolen plates, waiting for someone else's tire to fail or their engine to stall. Waiting for someone who does not know the forest is always listening. I know I survived because luck chose me that night. I know someone else was not that lucky, and I know deep inside that the man who followed me was not a helper, not a tow driver, not a stranger offering kindness in the dark. He was something else hiding in a human face. I kept thinking I needed to get away that year, and I told myself a long road trip through the old mountain roads of Appalachia would clear my head. I had just walked away from a warehouse job in a dead industrial town far to the north, a place that drained my mind day after day until I felt like a hollow version of myself. My friend Rowan had taken a new position teaching in a small mountain school down south, and he asked if I wanted to ride with him since he was moving anyway. I said yes, telling myself I wanted the ride, but deep down, I think I needed a break from everything I knew. The mountains rose higher the farther we drove, tall ridges covered in thick pine and long stretches of dark forest that looked older than the world. The roads wound like rivers, narrow and quiet, with long stretches where no other cars passed us. The deeper we went, the more I felt the air pressing against my chest like the land was watching us. When night came, the darkness felt heavier than it should, the kind that swallows the headlights until the forest seems to fold in around you. By the time we stopped at a small rest pullout tucked between two ridges, our voices had turned to tired mumbling. The place looked forgotten, with a cracked picnic table, a small visitor map, and a parking row carved into the dirt. Only one vehicle sat there with us, an old dark SUV that hummed low like it had been running for hours. In the front seat, a man leaned toward a woman sitting stiff in the passenger seat, his jaw moving in sharp cutting motions as if he was whispering something harsh and cold. The woman did not shift at all. She only stared straight ahead with wide eyes that looked empty of life. Her face held a frozen stillness that made my stomach twist, like she was trapped inside her own body. Rowan muttered something about needing to use the bathroom before collapsing in the seat, so we walked over to the small concrete restroom building. The lights flickered with a sick yellow that showed every crack in the tiles, every piece of mold tucked in the corners. I washed my hands, but the whole time I felt a weight in my chest, a strange pressure like something was happening outside while we weren't looking. When we stepped back out, the night felt a few degrees colder. The SUV was no longer where it had been. It had rolled forward, resting across the single narrow exit path as if blocking it, pointed like a silent warning. The woman in the passenger seat had turned her head toward us, her eyes following us in a slow, stiff track. The man spoke on speakerphone now, his voice oddly cheerful, so cheerful that it scraped something wrong inside me. He said something like, "We can keep everything quiet, nobody needs to find out right now," spoken in a tone people only use when they feel fully in control, when they believe nothing can stop them. Rowan looked at me without saying anything, but we both understood the same thing in the same moment. The woman's eyes flashed toward us again, and there was something begging in them, something that pulled at me in a way I did not understand. My throat tightened. I had no idea what to do. Help her. Look away. Get in the car and pretend none of it existed. We got out of there fast. Neither of us spoke for nearly 10 minutes, driving through the twisting black roads in a silence that felt sharp. Our plan had been to keep going until dawn, but our bodies were too drained and our nerves too stretched. The next tiny mountain town we reached had an old roadside lodge with a buzzing vacancy sign and a parking lot lit by tired floodlights. We checked in, hoping for rest, but when Rowan talked to the clerk and I stood outside with our bags, I saw a familiar shape move slowly across the far side of the road. The same SUV rolled silently through the dark, lights off, drifting into the lot like it was stalking us. It settled into a shadowed corner, dark and still like it wanted to disappear into the night. My chest tightened, and a cold shiver traveled down my spine. Nothing about this felt like a coincidence anymore. We hurried to our room and locked the door. It was a cheap roadside layout with two small rooms sharing one thin wall, the kind of wall that looked like a strong shove would break it. Rowan turned on the TV like noise might help us pretend nothing was wrong. I stood by the window, looking through a narrow gap in the curtain. The SUV sat unmoving, a black shape melting into the shadows. I could not stop thinking of the woman's eyes. The silent pleading, the stillness, the fear. Sometime after midnight, the tapping began. Soft at first, so gentle I thought maybe it was just the building settling, but then it came again. 3 taps spaced too evenly to be random. Rowan muted the TV in one fast motion. We both stared at the wall between us and the other room. The taps repeated, a little firmer, like someone testing how hard they could knock without drawing attention. Rowan stood up slowly, walking toward the wall with the cautious steps of someone expecting something to leap out at him. Then came a sound that stopped my breath. A soft dragging noise, something sliding over carpet just beyond the wall, slow and careful. Neither of us wanted to call the front desk. It felt dramatic. It felt like maybe we were exhausted and overthinking the entire night. But then another sound slipped through the wall, a long, strained breath, the kind someone makes when they are trying very hard to stay silent. Rowan grabbed his phone. While he talked to dispatch, explaining the SUV and the tapping and the strange movements in the forest rest area, I watched the parking lot through the curtain again. The SUV had not moved. It just sat in the same dark corner, heavy and quiet, as if waiting for a signal. A few minutes later, someone knocked on our door. But it wasn't the police. The knocking was soft and slow, following the same rhythm as the tapping on the wall. We didn't move. We didn't even breathe. Whoever it was knocked one more time, then walked past our door with soft, slow steps and moved toward the far end of the building. A door creaked open, then silence swallowed everything. When the patrol car finally arrived, faint red and blue light washed across our curtains. Relief hit me for a second, until I realized I had no idea what they were about to find next door. The officers knocked on the door of the room beside ours, calling out. No one answered. They knocked again, louder, and the whole atmosphere shifted. One officer tried the handle. The door swung open without resistance. Rowan and I shouldn't have stepped out, but we did, standing in our doorway to see. The room was empty, bed untouched. Lights off, no luggage. No sign anyone ever stayed there. But the smell lingered, a mix of cheap cologne and something metallic, sharp against the nose like cold iron. The officers exchanged a look that told me they weren't ignoring the situation. They started checking corners and doors along the walkway. The clerk came up the stairs, a nervous older man who kept rubbing his thumb across his palm. He listened as Rowan explained the SUV, the tapping, everything. When Rowan mentioned the man's words at the rest stop, the clerk's face stiffened. His voice dropped low as he said something that made every hair on my neck rise. He said that a man who matched that description had stayed there before, never using the same name twice, always checking in late, always with a woman who never spoke a single word. The clerk said he never liked dealing with him, but he never knew how to act without causing trouble. The officers wrote down every detail. They didn't act like any of this was impossible. I could tell they were already planning how far they needed to search through the twisting ridge roads. The clerk insisted we move to another room near the front office for the night. He handed us a new key card with slow, careful hands, almost as if he expected the man from the SUV to appear behind us. Rowan grabbed the bags and we walked along the railing, glancing toward the parking lot. The SUV was gone, no sound, no lights. It was as if the night swallowed it whole. The space where it had been looked wrong, as if the air itself felt relieved. We tried to sleep. We failed. Every sound made my nerves jump. Pipe sticking, a truck far on the highway, a door closing somewhere down the hall. My mind kept replaying the woman's silent stare, the pleading look that felt carved into my memory. By morning, the officers told us they found no sign of the SUV, nothing in the town, nothing on the mountain roads. The clerk only nodded when he heard, like he wasn't surprised at all. We left quickly. The rising sun cut through the heavy mist, making the forest look harmless in a way that felt like a lie. But I couldn't shake the memory of that woman's eyes or the soft tapping on the wall in the middle of the night, and I couldn't shake one last thought, one that still crawls under my skin. Sometimes the scariest things are not spirits or monsters or anything supernatural. Sometimes the real horror is people moving through forgotten mountain roads, slipping through the cracks of the world, doing things they know nobody will see, nobody will question, nobody will ever fully understand. And sometimes all you can do is hope you drove away in time. I always thought I knew what loneliness felt like, but I learned the real meaning of it deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where the pine trees grow too tall and the roads twist like they are planning to swallow travelers whole. I didn't realize that one wrong turn on a quiet afternoon could shape the rest of my life. Back then, I was working as a seasonal wildlife surveyor, moving from one remote region to another because the pay changed with the location, and chasing higher rates kept my bills alive. My name is Jordan, and for almost 10 months of every year I lived inside my old SUV, eating cheap food, logging animal sightings for state reports, and driving through places most people never knew existed. I grew up around forests, and my father used to tell me that mountains remember people, but I never understood what he meant until the day everything happened. That week, I had been covering 3 counties in the eastern Appalachians, hopping from ridge to ridge, stopping at abandoned fire towers, logging tracks of elk and black bear. I slept in the back of my SUV, washed up at rest stops, and drank too much gas station coffee. On that afternoon, the sky was overcast, and the air tasted like rain long before the clouds gave in. Around 2:17 p.m., I left a ridge survey point and headed toward a town I had planned to pass through. I had heard it had a small diner where I hoped to eat something hot for once. Somewhere along a forgotten road that cut between the mountains, the front right tire of my SUV made a strange wobbling sound, like the wheels shifted weight every few seconds. I pulled over on a narrow gravel shoulder, stepped out and checked the tire, but nothing looked damaged. Still, the wobble felt too wrong to ignore, so I kept my speed slow, hoping for a mechanic in the next town. But the only sign I saw was a weather-beaten wooden board pointing toward a place called Coldwell Hollow, a name I didn't remember from any of my maps. My GPS had no record of it, and the sunlight felt dimmer the farther up the mountain I went, like the trees wanted to keep the sky for themselves. I turned anyway, because the wobble kept getting stronger, and any help was better than getting stranded. Coldwell Hollow barely counted as a town. A crooked main road cut through a cluster of buildings that looked like they had been abandoned decades ago. Rusted signs, boarded windows, and quiet porches made the place look frozen in time. Only one spot showed any life, a little country store with a flickering open sign and an old garage behind it. The garage door was half raised, and a tall man in a faded coverall stood beneath it, wiping his hands on a rag that looked older than the building. His name patch was missing completely, leaving only a pale outline. His gray-black hair was tied back with a frayed green band, and he stared the way animals do when they hear something you cannot. His presence unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain, but I needed help, and he was the only person around. I told him about the tire wobble, and he nodded slowly, almost too slowly, then said he needed to bring the SUV into the closed bay for safety. He made a dry laugh under his breath, like he had told a joke I wasn't supposed to understand. I said I could stay outside, but he shook his head and pointed toward a small side door with a metal plate where the latch should have been. He unlocked it with a key from his pocket and said it wouldn't take long. I stepped into the room, and the air felt wrong immediately, trapped in a way that made my skin crawl. The windows were boarded up from inside with mismatched wood, and the boards were placed at odd angles, like someone had fastened them during a panic. The only furniture was a sagging couch that dipped in the middle and a vending machine humming strangely, its snacks long expired. When he shut the door, I heard a lock click, even though I saw no latch on my side. A faint tremor of worry climbed up my spine. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. No sound came from the garage, not even a tool clinking or footsteps. I knocked gently on the door, then harder. Nothing answered except the hum of the vending machine and the wind slipping through the boards. Around 4:49 p.m., I couldn't sit still anymore. I checked every corner of the room, then noticed a small storage door behind the vending machine. The bottom was dented, like someone had kicked it once and failed. I braced all my weight and pushed until the wood cracked and bent inward. The space behind it revealed a narrow corridor with a single swinging bulb on a frayed wire. The corridor smelled like dust and cold metal. At the end was another doorway, which opened into the back of the garage. My SUV sat parked in the exact same place I had left it, untouched. That alone made goosebumps rise along my arms. To its left stood several clear plastic bins stacked neatly, but what was inside twisted my stomach. Backpacks, jackets, toiletry bags. A single tiny shoe. Random items that didn't belong together. Life fragments stolen from strangers. I walked closer, my steps too loud on the concrete. One bin was filled with cracked phones and old chargers. Another bin held luggage tags, keychains, and even a bent license plate folded like someone had tried to break it in half. They were not sorted, just kept as though the owner of the garage collected pieces of people. It reminded me chillingly of the tow truck driver I once met in another remote region who refused to help a stranded woman unless she let him hold on to her ID. The world has strange faces hidden behind friendly jobs, but something here felt darker than any bad encounter. A metallic smell filled the air, faint but sharp, like dried blood that had been scrubbed yet refused to disappear. The bulb above me swayed, though there was no wind, causing the shadows to shift over the bins like something was moving. Then I heard a scraping sound in the far corner, a quick dragging noise across the concrete. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I could feel it in my teeth. That sound wasn't the wind. It was something or someone shifting out of sight. My keys were not in my pocket. The mechanic had them, my backpack too. That hit me in a sickening wave. It dawned on me how easy it would be for someone to erase a person here. Take their car, their phone, their bag, and they would just vanish. I looked around, searching for any exit. On the left side of the corridor, a side door with wired glass caught my eye. The glass was painted over from inside, but small cracks allowed thin slivers of daylight through. I pressed my ear against the metal and heard distant traffic, the soft roar of cars passing fast. Hope sparked inside me. The doorknob resisted at first, but when I leaned my weight into it, the old frame shifted just enough to open. I slipped out into the late afternoon light. Behind the garage, weeds grew tall through cracked pavement. The land sloped down toward the highway, and no other vehicles were in sight. I moved as fast as I could without running, stepping carefully through junk and rusted parts. When I reached the edge, I slid down the embankment. The moment my feet hit the shoulder, I stuck out my arm at the passing cars. A delivery van slowed down first. The driver stared at me like he wasn't sure if I was hurt or insane. I asked him for a ride to the next town with a police station. He said he was heading east and unlocked the door. I climbed in, shaking so hard my legs barely obeyed me. As we pulled away, I looked back up the hill, expecting to see the mechanic watching from above, but no one stood there. The place looked empty, like the mountains were swallowing the town back into their roots. At the police station, the officer on duty listened to me carefully, but watched me with cautious eyes. When I described the bins, he leaned forward slightly. He asked for the exact location, but when I opened my GPS, the map marker bounced around, refusing to lock onto any point. The officer sent someone to check the area while I gave my full statement. By 8:32 p.m., another officer entered quietly. He said the garage was locked up, lights off, recently vacated. No signs of boarded windows. No bins. No mechanic. But fresh tire tracks led from behind the building to the main road. They asked about my SUV, and one officer gave a tight look to the other. A vehicle matching the description had been found 2 counties away in an impound lot, untouched. No damage, no ticket, no report. Dropped off in the middle of the night. When they released me the next morning, I went to the impound lot. Seeing my SUV parked neatly between other cars made my skin prickle. Everything inside was exactly as I left it. My backpack, my maps, even the notes I kept from my wildlife surveys. The keys were sitting perfectly centered on the front seat, like someone placed them there with intention. I asked about their cameras, but the attendant said the system had been down for days. I drove away, gripping the wheel firmly, checking every sound the SUV made, wondering if the tire wobble had ever existed at all. Every time I passed a small town, I checked if it appeared on my map. Coldwell Hollow never did. Weeks later, I tried telling one of my coworkers about what happened. She asked why I went into a town that wasn't listed anywhere. I said I didn't know. Maybe desperation, maybe instinct, maybe something older. The Appalachians have a way of swallowing stories, and maybe I became one of them that day. Since then, I never travel those roads without a full tank, and I pay attention to every mile marker, every sign, every feeling that tells me to turn around before something behind the trees decides otherwise. But the worst part came later, during another assignment near the Tennessee border. One night around 9:41 p.m., I heard a scream echo through the woods while logging survey data, a sharp, panicked sound that cut the still air. I ran toward it at first, thinking someone needed help. The scream repeated, identical in pitch and rhythm, and that made me stop. I found a small speaker placed at the base of a tree, hidden in leaves. The scream played again from it, and that was when I realized I wasn't alone. Someone had placed it there on purpose. I left immediately and didn't stop driving until sunrise. Sometimes, when I travel those roads past old motels, I notice parking lots full of cars that arrive only after midnight and vanish before dawn. Sometimes I see tow trucks with drivers who stare too long, asking strange questions about IDs. And sometimes, on forgotten mountain roads, I see signs pointing towards small towns that feel like they want me to enter, even when I know better. I don't stop anymore. And if you ever find yourself driving through the Appalachians, alone, tired, lost, and you see a sign pointing toward a town your GPS cannot find, keep driving. Some places don't want visitors. Some places want something else. I did not plan to admit that truth out loud because saying it meant accepting that the Appalachia wilds had already marked me, calling me back like a voice buried under leaves and dirt. Yet the longer I stared at the fading road signs, the more I felt like the forest already knew I was coming. I did not want to believe it, but every mile felt like someone whispering my name from the tree line. When I was 30 years old, I finally returned to Ridgewater Valley, the Appalachian stretch where my brother Milo vanished without a trace. People in the nearest town had claimed he fell from a cliff or froze during a storm or got dragged by a hungry bear, but those were guesses from people who never knew how careful he was. He remembered every hill, every branch, every turn. He planned his routes 3 times before walking them once, so when his body never turned up, not even a scrap of clothing, I knew something worse had happened. Something that the mountains kept for themselves. I had spent years reading his last messages, the ones he mailed before he disappeared, full of strange lines that made no sense at the time, like the forest was trying to write something through him. His words had crawled into my dreams, repeating until I could not ignore them anymore. So I shoved a bag into my trunk, drove out of my city life, and headed toward a small forgotten place called Hazelmark, a fading town clinging to the edge of the Appalachia woods. I did not tell anyone my real reason. I simply said I needed fresh air, but all I wanted was the truth, no matter how bad it hurt. Hazelmark looked like a place the world had left behind. One gas pump leaning sideways, one diner with a flickering sign, a few houses sinking into the mud, and a dusty trail that vanished into trees thick as walls. The people stared at me like they already knew my name, like they had been waiting for me to arrive. That should have scared me, but grief kept me blind, and I walked deeper without questioning the way their eyes followed me. I carried Milo's old field diary, the one filled with phrases that had seemed crazy back then but now felt like warnings, words about the ground breathing, about voices humming under roots, about something hollow that was not hollow at all. The more pages I read, the more it felt like he had tried to tell me something before the mountains swallowed him. My first night in Ridgewater, I found a small shelter, a broken wooden structure with tired beams carved up with initials and notes. But one carving made my blood turn cold. Someone had dug into the wood with something sharp, writing a confession so deep it splintered the frame. It said, I watched her stop moving, zipped her inside the sleeping bag, and walked away. She still sings in my dreams. Under it, scratched so faintly it looked like it had been done with a broken nail, were the words, her crown is still on, I kept it on her. I stared at the carving until the sky turned dark, feeling like someone was standing right behind me. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I pictured a little girl zipped into a sleeping bag, her head wearing a plastic crown. When I woke around 6:10 a.m. the next morning, I found a small toy tiara lying beside the fire pit, half buried in dirt. There were no footprints, no signs of anyone visiting, just that tiara waiting for me like a gift. I should have turned back right then, but grief is a cruel thing. It twists your choices, turning fear into fuel. So I moved deeper into the mountains, following the trail Milo once walked, even though everything inside me begged me to stop. The deeper I went, the more the trails warped. Paths that were supposed to run straight now looped like circles, leading me right back to where I started. Fog rolled in even without clouds. Branches cracked in directions where nothing stood. It felt like the mountains were shifting behind my back, changing shape whenever I blinked. And then I found the other journals. Scattered across different shelters were notebooks, torn papers, even carvings on smooth stones, all filled with confessions too detailed to be imagination. Someone wrote about burying a woman alive near a ridge named Cinder Peak, and when I checked the coordinates, they lined up with a missing hiker named Mara Hostin. Another notebook described tying a man's hands, stuffing his mouth, dragging him inside a cave where he screamed until the echo swallowed his voice. I read every line, shaking, feeling like the forest was showing me pieces of the truth one by one. I tried calling for help, I tried sending messages. Nothing left the mountain. My phone made no sound, no signal, not even a single bar. It was like something in the trees wanted me cut off completely, like the place itself had a mind. 4 nights in, Around 1:30 a.m., I woke to a scraping sound outside my tent, slow, heavy dragging across the mud. I held my breath, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The cold stabbed my lungs, and at first the world looked empty, but then I saw them. 10 long claw marks in the mud, deep and shaking, like someone had been dragged backwards while fighting for their life. At the end of the grooves lay a single ballet shoe covered in black moss. I touched it, and the fabric felt warm, as if someone had worn it minutes before. Panic pushed me into running, crashing through branches and roots until I stumbled upon a cave mouth half hidden by fallen stone. Something inside me knew this was the place Milo had spoken about without realizing it. The place where he changed or died, or both. I crawled inside, my light flickering like it wanted to leave me behind. The cave walls pulsed with damp heat that did not feel natural, and as I crawled deeper I saw bones arranged in shapes like letters or symbols I did not understand. Some bones looked human, others did not, but all were placed with purpose. In the deepest chamber, my flashlight hit a shape on the ground, and I froze. It was Milo, or what was left of him. His arms were still tied behind him, his wrists scraped raw against stone, and his ribs were stretched like something had tried to pull his chest open. The gouge marks around him told me he had fought hard until the very end. Beside him lay his journal, open to the last page. The sentence on it felt like a scream trapped on paper. It said, "This is not a cave, it is a throat, and it is still starving." My breath shook so badly I almost dropped the light. I tried to crawl backward, but when I turned around, the tunnel behind me was gone. The walls had closed into a narrow hallway, pulsing like a living body, warm and wet and breathing around me. Then the shape appeared. Not a monster, not at first, but a shifting figure made of faces I knew. Sometimes it looked like Milo, sometimes like our mother, sometimes like me. It smiled each time it changed, and its mouth was always too wide, its teeth too many. I could not scream. My voice died inside my chest. The shape came closer, studying me, waiting for me to understand something I did not want to understand. When the walls squeezed tight, I passed out, or maybe something took my memory. I only know I woke up outside the cave entrance with my bag missing and my hands covered in dirt and blood. My chest burned with a pain I could not explain, and the forest whispered around me with a voice that sounded like Milo calling my name from every leaf and stone. I ran until I reached the next shelter, breathing in sharp bursts, and that was when I saw it. My name carved into the beam, with today's date beside it. Under my name was a line carved so deep it made the wood split. It said, "I packed him in the sleeping bag like the rest, she is next." I started shaking so hard the shelter walls blurred. Someone had written about murders that had not happened yet, murders with my name attached. That was when I realized something terrible. I had no memory of a few hours. Something had taken that time from me, replacing it with nothing but ringing inside my skull. Something had used my hands. The mountains were not just a place, they were a thing. A living thing built from every person who had ever died here. A being that took their voices and memories, blending them into one endless hunger. I tried to flee the valley, stumbling toward the nearest road, but the forest twisted around me, changing direction each time I blinked. That was when I saw the old road sign pointing toward a detour. I followed it, desperate to escape, but the sign led me to a checkpoint I had never seen before, a small wooden booth with 2 men wearing uniforms with no badges. Their faces were too smooth, their smiles too stiff, and when they spoke, their voices echoed like they came from deep inside a tunnel. They asked why I was trying to leave. They said my name before I even told them. I realized too late that they were not officials. They were something else, wearing the shapes of men. I ran again, crashing through brush until I hit the old road that led toward Hazelmark. My car stood exactly where I left it, but something felt wrong. My breath froze when I crouched to check my tires, because there under the frame was a tracking device, blinking like an eye. Someone had been following me long before I entered the mountains. Someone who wanted me back here. I had no choice. I drove until the trees thinned, But the highway ahead made no sense. The markers were not right. The landmarks were twisted. I pulled over near a gas station that wasn't on any map, a place with lights that buzzed like flies and people who all turned to stare at me the moment I stepped out. They spoke my name before I even reached the door. They asked how my brother was doing. They said they had been expecting me. That was when I understood the truth. This town did not exist, not on maps, not in reality. It was another piece of the mountain, another shape it used. The forest had followed me, or maybe I had never left it. I backed away, climbed into my car, and stepped on the gas, not caring where the road led. The world blurred into trees again, the same endless trees with branches that reached like hands trying to pull me back into the soil. Hours later, or maybe minutes, I found myself on a dirt path that ended in a huge fallen oak. Someone had tucked a torn map into a hollow in the trunk. My hands shook as I pulled it out, and inside the folds were more carvings, more notes, more confessions from people who had tried to warn others before me. But the last note was mine, in my own handwriting. It said, "If you are reading this, the mountains already chose you. It takes your face, your voice, your memories, and makes you another piece of itself." I dropped the map, shaking so hard my teeth hurt. I did not remember writing a single word of it. Night fell fast, swallowing everything in black. The air thickened with whispers, voices that sounded like Milo mixed with strangers, calling me deeper, telling me to finish what they started. I covered my ears, but the voices moved inside my bones. I wanted to run. I wanted to claw my way out. But then I saw a shadow standing between the trees, wearing my exact shape. Same hair, same jacket, same face twisted into a smile I had never made. It tilted its head slowly, like it was learning how to move. Then it lifted its hand and motioned for me to follow it. My legs shook as I backed away. My heart thumped like a drum hitting my ribs. The air tasted like dirt and metal. I whispered a prayer I had not spoken since childhood, hoping something would hear me and drag me out of this nightmare. But the shadow smiled wider, showing rows of teeth that did not belong in any human mouth. I ran again, plunging deeper into darkness, not knowing if I was going up or down, east or west, forward or straight into the ground. The forest roared around me with sounds that were not animal and not wind, and as I stumbled, I felt something warm drip from my nose. Blood. The ground pulsed like a heartbeat beneath my feet. My lungs burned. My eyes blurred. My voice cracked as I screamed Milo's name into the night, but the only answer was the echo singing it back in a dozen different tones. The trees bent, the roots shifted, and I felt myself sinking into something soft. Mud. Ash. Something that felt like skin stretched beneath soil. I kept moving until I saw lights ahead, small warm lights that looked like safety. A tiny cabin sat at the edge of a ravine, candles flickering inside. I staggered toward it, desperate for shelter, but as I reached the door, the air went still, too still. I pushed the door open. Inside sat a dozen people in a circle, silent and still as statues. Their eyes were wide and glassy, their faces blank, their clothes torn. They looked like hikers. Some looked like they had been here for years. Others looked fresh. All of them stared straight at me, and then they spoke at the same time, with the same voice, with the same tone, as if one mind was using their mouths. They said, "We have been waiting for you. Join us and feed the valley." I stumbled backward, hitting the wall, feeling like my bones were melting. Their heads twisted toward me in perfect unison, like dolls on strings. Then their mouths stretched open in silent screams, wider and wider, until their jaws should have snapped. I bolted out the door, tripping down the ravine edge and rolling until the world spun. When I stopped, everything was quiet again. Too quiet. I sat up slowly, breath shaking, and realized I was back near the cave. The same entrance, the same stones. The same smell of earth that was not earth. I did not remember how I returned. I did not want to know. And as I stared at the cave mouth, a voice behind me whispered my name. My brother's voice. Soft, gentle, wrong. I turned, expecting to see Milo, but I only saw darkness. The voice came again, closer, almost touching my ear. "Come home," it said. "The valley is hungry." Something inside me broke. I ran until the world blurred. I do not know how long. Minutes, hours, years. The forest swallowed every step. Now I am sitting on the broken steps of an old trail marker, writing all of this on the back of a torn map I found in a hollow tree. If you are reading this, then I need you to listen carefully. The Appalachia Mountains do not lose people. They take them. They reshape them. They remember every voice, every fear, every scream. These woods are alive with everything that ever died here, and they do not let go. If you hear the whispers, you are already part of it. If you see something wearing your face, it is not a ghost. It is your replacement. And if you ever drive through a small town that is not on any map and everyone there already knows your name, turn around before the mountains decide you belong to them too. I can hear the voice calling again. My brother, my mother, myself. I do not know which one is real anymore. I think the valley is ready for me now. I think I am changing. If you read this, run far away. Run before it remembers you. I start with fear because it is the only honest place left inside me, and the moment you hear what happened to me on that Appalachian road, you will understand why I still check every dark window before I sleep, even now. I was not supposed to be alone on that trip, but life has a way of stripping you down until the only thing left is the part that trembles. My name is Rowan. I am a field technician for a small satellite company, and I was never the kind of person who believed in curses, strange trails, or whispered warnings. But the mountains taught me fast. I was heading toward a forgotten ridge to scatter the ashes of a man who taught me more about absence than love. A father who disappeared when I was 7 and died far from anything that resembled family. His will demanded that his ashes be released somewhere quiet in the Appalachia where trees remember, a phrase that clung to my ribs like a cold hand. I did not owe him a journey, but something inside me kept saying, go now, go before whatever chased him finds you too. I drove for hours into country where the roads thinned into narrow curls of cracked pavement, and by the time I reached a rural diner near a place called Birchwater Gap, the sky had dimmed into bruised blue. I stopped for food, not hunger, just delay, and that is when I saw the first wrong thing. A girl sat in a booth with a man whose hand locked around her wrist like a metal trap. Her eyes asked help the way drowning people breathe water. When the waitress brought their meals, she slipped an extra sandwich onto the edge of the girl's plate with a glance that said, "I see you." The man squeezed her arm tighter, his face stretching into a smile that held no warmth, and the girl's lips trembled. I stared too long, and the man turned his head toward me with a look that slid under my skin. I paid and left quickly, but her eyes followed me in the reflection of the window, begging without sound. I should have called someone, but I told myself not to interfere, a lie I regret more every day. I left the diner and traveled deeper into the wooded mountains, the air growing colder, the cello hum of cicadas fading until the silence felt too heavy to belong in nature. My father's ashes sat in a metal urn beside me, rattling whenever the car hit a pothole, as if he wanted out. I passed a boarded ranger station and 3 abandoned cabins before reaching an old trail turnout with a wooden sign leaning sideways, its paint faded, the letters carved into the grain Redmare Crossing. My father had written about it in his journal, calling it a place of fire and fog where a man could find peace if he had nothing left but regret. That sounded like him, broken and poetic in the worst way. I checked my pack, adjusted the straps, and began walking along the narrow path. The first mile was quiet, normal quiet, the kind where the wind plays in branches and birds gossip overhead. But as the trail curved deeper between thick pines, everything stopped. No birds, no wind, nothing breathing except me. The stillness pressed against my ears like cotton. That is when I found the first abandoned pack beside a moss-eaten stump. It leaned as if someone had set it down moments ago, yet mildew had spread across the fabric in patterns that take years. I crouched and opened it. Inside lay a decaying notebook, warped protein bars melted into their wrappers, and an old camera that somehow flickered awake when I pressed the button. I watched the video that night in my tent. The footage showed a hiker filming himself day after day. At first, he joked about the trail, talked about weather, talked about his dog waiting at home, but then he started hearing someone whistling a slow tune, the kind of song old church ladies hum during funerals. He said it drifted through the trees every night, always close, never visible. The last video showed him crying, holding the camera as the whistling grew louder, circling his tent. He whispered please before shouting into the darkness, "Who are you?" And then the whistling stopped. Footsteps, slow and dragging, approached the tent, then static swallowed the screen. I did not sleep. My heart beat like a trapped bird. When dawn finally crawled over the ridge, I crawled out of my tent only to freeze. My pack had been moved, unzipped, and placed on top of my clothes was a small bone. It could have belonged to a bird or something worse. I felt watched, studied, measured. I should have turned back, but I had come this far, and the ashes meant more than the fear choking me. I walked deeper into the trail until I lost my way, slipping down a steep slope into a hollow shrouded in deep-shadowed canopy where sunlight seemed forbidden. The ground glistened with moss too vibrant to be natural, a neon pulse in the dark. At the center stood a small cabin, crooked and slumped like something had frightened it. The smell hit before I reached the window, a mixture of smoke, rusted iron, and something sweet enough to rot teeth. Through a broken pane, I saw blades hung on nails, hooks glinting in half-light, and bones sorted into neat rows. A pit smoldered in the corner, lined with stones slick with dark grease. It was still warm. I stumbled back just as a slow tune drifted around the cabin. The same funeral melody. Someone whistled behind the structure, steady and calm. I ran. My breath tore at my throat, branches clawed at my clothes, and the forest seemed to twist around me like a maze built for prey. I did not stop until I collapsed beside a creek. My chest heaved. Cold water numbed my shaking. When I lifted my head, a small note hung from a branch above me, pinned by a tiny wooden peg. The card read, "Blessings on your journey," signed with a smiley face. The handwriting matched the messages in the trail angel coolers I had passed earlier. Trail angels do not leave warm smoke pits filled with bones. I followed what looked like an old ranger road until a shape crawled toward me from the shadows, dragging itself on shredded hands. A man, ribs visible under gray skin, whispered, "Do not drink it, do not eat it. He smiles when they die." His head dropped against the dirt, and when I turned him over to check for breath, he was gone. No trace, only drag marks fading into leaf litter. My heart throbbed in my ears. I clutched the urn, the only reminder of why I had come, only to find the lid cracked open. Ashes circled my sleeping spot in a perfect ring, as though someone had sifted them with care. I kept walking until the trees thinned and a tall figure appeared between two oaks. A man with no shoes, skin ghost pale, wearing a wide hat that cast his face in shadow. Ropes of bones dangled from the branches above him, clicking softly. He stood still except for his lips, which formed the slow whistle that now carved itself into my skull. I backed away, but the trail markers behind me had shifted. Every arrow pointed toward a number I had never seen on any map, mile 139, though the ridge was not long enough to reach that number. Yet every step I took pushed me forward until I stumbled into a shack barely big enough to be called shelter. The door was locked, but the smell inside was unmistakable, a swamp of rot. I kicked the door until it splintered. Inside, dozens of packs hung from nails in the walls, along with hiking boots, ID cards, journal pages, scraps of clothing, all displayed like trophies. The floorboards groaned under my feet. I pried a loose plank and uncovered wax paper-wrapped bundles with names scribbled faintly on them. Inside was meat that looked too fresh to belong to anything wild. I ran again, lungs burning, throat dry, fear pounding with every step. The whistling echoed from every direction, a chorus of slow, patient notes that promised I would not make it out. The forest leaned in around me, branches like ribs of a collapsing cage, but just as my legs buckled, I broke through the tree line and collapsed onto a paved road. A ranger truck screeched to a stop, the driver jumping out to lift me onto the bumper. I told them everything. The man, the cabin, The bone pit, the bone pit. The whistling. They exchanged looks that made me feel insane, but the next day a forensic group hiked out and confirmed human remains in the smoke pit. Multiple victims, some missing for nearly a decade. The rangers said a man named Milo had been offering supplies to hikers along the ridge for years, always smiling, always kind, handing out food that later tested positive for poison. He had vanished 2 weeks before they found me. I was released from the hospital days later, but sleep does not come easily anymore. Not after the dreams. Sometimes I wake at 2:17 a.m. to the faint hum of that funeral tune slipping through my window, slow and steady. Sometimes I swear I see a figure outside the tree line behind my house, no shoes, pale skin glowing under moonlight. Before leaving the mountains, I revisited my father's journal, hoping for clarity. On the last page, in a shaky scrawl, he wrote that the mountain takes who it wants, and sometimes it turns them into something else. Something patient, something hungry. I do not know if the pale man was Milo or what the mountains carved from him, and I do not know if the girl from the diner survived or if the man gripping her wrist ever let her leave that booth. I do not know who whispers warnings in the dark or why ashes were placed around me like a ritual boundary. But I know this. When I drive past wooded roads now, I hear whistling in the trees, drifting slow and careful, and I feel watched. Some things in the Appalachia do not hunt fast. They wait. They smile. They follow,